on behalf of the World Affairs Council and the Marines Memorial Association, and on behalf of our Chairman and CEO, Major General Mike Myatt, I welcome you this evening. I'm Chris Starling, and I will be your moderator tonight. It's my pleasure now to introduce tonight's guest. As Commander of NORAD and U.S. Northern Command, Admiral William Gortney is responsible for the homeland defense, defense support of civil authorities, and security cooperation on the continent of North America. He is a career naval aviator and has completed 7 command tours as well as 5 joint tours. He has served as the director of the Joint Staff in Washington, D.C., and most recently commanded the U.S. Fleet Forces Command. You can find Admiral Gortney's biography in your program tonight. So for a conversation about national security here in the U.S., please join me in welcoming Admiral Gortney.
Thanks for asking me to be here tonight. It's a great opportunity to have a conversation with you, and that's what I really want to do. I'm only going to talk for about maybe 10 minutes. And then I want to hear from you. I want to hear your questions, because what you find interesting, I find fascinating. It's really why I do these sorts of things, because I can't read your mind of what interests you and what matters to you. And I will give you a response as I know it. I will tell you if I'm accountable for the issue that you talk about, and if it's not within what we call our wheelhouse inside of my job responsibility. My job responsibility as the commander of NORAD and Northern Command, I'll just give you my opinion as Bill Gortney. And you may not like the response, but I'm just going to give it to you how I feel, all right? We've put on your, many people, as commander of NORAD and NORTHCOM, I've been working with NORAD and NORTHCOM since I was a Rear Admiral Select, and Rear Admiral Lower Half Select. And in that, we call those captains in the United States Navy, colonels in the United States Marine Corps. And I've been working with them ever since. But since I took command a little over 13 months ago, I'm really struck by how many people don't really understand what NORAD and NORTHCOM do. What is our role? What is our mission? And I'm here to tell you that we span the spectrum of conflict. On one end, we're involved with nuclear command and control, nuclear warfare. On the other end, we track Santa Claus. And I'm here to tell you, how many people here have kids or grandkids? Raise your hand, all right? We might make a mistake. It's okay to make a mistake over here on the right end, nuclear warfare, but we cannot fail in tracking Santa. And it's a lot of fun, and if you want to know more about that, let me know. We got a great app. We put on your flyer, on your chair, a little flyer, a little trifold. So I'm not going to put PowerPoint slides in front of you. Instead, I put 40 PowerPoint slides on a piece of paper in front of you. But I'm going to walk you through them, so don't open them up, and I'm going to steer you in the right direction. And the first place I want to steer you is on the very front of this. That says North American Aerospace Defense Command and U.S. Northern Command. And below that, it has our mission statements. What's interesting is we are 2 commands. NORAD, born of the Cold War, 1958, we're 58 years old. Shaped by the Cold War and 9/11. U.S. Northern Command, born of 9/11, when there was no commander in charge of the defense of the homeland. And we created Northern Command because of it. And it's been shaped by 9/11 and Hurricane Katrina. And today, we are so much past those particular points as the mission has evolved of what we do. Now, if you read the NORAD mission statement, and I ask that you don't look down and read it, I'll just tell you, we're responsible. It's a binational command. I am a Canadian commander. I report up the Canadian Command and Control, and I will tell you about that here in a second. But our responsibility there is North American Air Defense Command. If it flies and it's penetrating Canadian or U.S. airspace in North America, I'm accountable for it. It was designed to counter Soviet long-range aviation. And today we track Russian long-range aviation, or anything that flies inside that particular airspace of Canada and the United States under a program we call Operation Noble Eagle. And that's a result of 9/11, to prevent another attack from the air in the homeland. U.S. Northern Command's mission is a little more complex. Its primary task, my primary task, is to defend the homeland, the United States. It is not part of, Canada responsibilities are not a part of U.S. Northern Command. And that's a pretty cool mission. I'm going on my 39th year, and my mission is to defend the homeland. It's kind of what we joined for. So it's a really, really cool mission. We execute the aerospace piece of that mission under NORAD, if that makes sense to you. So the operational control of aircraft to defend the homeland, we do it through NORAD chain of command. The additional responsibilities are the defense support for civil authorities. And if you look down on the mission statement, it says U.S. NORTHCOM partners, and we underline the word partners because in the traditional sense of the defense of the homeland, I'm accountable, I'm responsible. But in the non-traditional threat, say the terrorist threat, I'm not responsible. It's not my primary job. I'm not the person that the American people say, Bill, it's your job. That is the job of Jay Johnson at Homeland Security. And my responsibility is to partner with him and the organizations that he's in charge of in any of the diverse mission tasks that he has, whether it's a weather of mass destruction event, a Hurricane Katrina, or a Superstorm Sandy, or an earthquake. That's what we work really hard on this coast. If they need the Department of Defense support, U.S. Northern Command provides for it. The other thing is to work with our partners that live in this country. As we divide the world up in the Department of Defense, we divide the world up into 6 geographic combatant commanders. And those geographic combatant commanders are responsible for everything in the mill-to-mill relationship of all the countries that reside in there. So I only have 3 I work with. One is Canada. That's pretty easy since I'm a Canadian commander. I just don't play hockey. The second is the Bahamas. And the third is with Mexico. And we have a very strong, very, very strong relationship with Sedena and Samar in a mill-to-mill relationship as we partner with them and improve their capabilities, the capabilities that they view that they need in whatever their nation asks for. The next thing I want you to do, I want you to open up your trifold, and I want you to go to the upper right-hand corner. You guys see this on YouTube? Huh? Okay. And there's the chain of command. I think chain of command is important, understanding the chain of command. Because in my going on 39 years of service, I know that if there's 2 problems, it's because people don't understand their chain of command, who they work for. It's either that, or they don't understand what their person they're working for, what does the boss want. We call that commander's intent in the military. So under NORAD, I work for both the President and the Prime Minister of Canada. As a matter of fact, there's only 2 of our geographic combatant commanders that have to be approved outside of confirmed by our United States Senate in order before being nominated for this job. Myself and General Breedlove at UCOM and SHAPE as the Supreme Headquarters Allied Commander for NATO. So the Canadian government has to approve the commander of NORAD. That's defined by the NORAD agreement. Again, 58 years old, it's very, very specific on what we can do and what we can't do. But the Canadian government works for it. And so I work directly for their Chief of Defense Staff, their Chairman equivalent, their Minister of Defense, their Secretary of Defense equivalent, and their Prime Minister. And we just had their Minister of Defense in the headquarters all day yesterday, and we had him at the House last night. Under NORAD, I work up that same chain, but I do not work for the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Per Goldwater-Nichols, he is not in the accountability chain of command. So I talk to Joe Dunford every day and tell him, hey, Joe, I don't work for you, but I do need this. But so how's that work for me? But he is not in the chain of command or the accountability chain of command. We work, the geographic combatant commanders and the functional combatant commanders work directly for the Secretary of Defense, and he works for the President. And of course, the President works for who? That's right, all of you all. You all passed civics. Clearly, you didn't go to the Naval Academy. So that's the chain of command. Underneath that, we are a single command. even though the staff structure is of a single staff structure. When NORTHCOM stood up, it was 2 separate commands with a single commander. And the second commander was a gentleman named Admiral Timothy Keating. He's a mentor of mine. And he had the vision to slam the 2 organizations together, and they are the same staff. So if they are in the intel organization, they're the NORAD and NORTHCOM intel organization. If they're plans and policies, it's NORAD and NORTHCOM. With the exception of operations, we execute the day-to-day operations of NORAD mission through a separate NORAD operations officer, and we execute the NORTHCOM mission set through a separate NORTHCOM mission set operations officer. Below them, we have service components. So I have from all the services 3 stars or a 2-star that work for us that help us do our mission as NORAD and as Northern Command. We have Marine Forces. Marine Forces North is also dual-hatted as Marine Forces Reserve in New Orleans. The Navy component is a 4-star Fleet Forces Command and Naval Forces North. That was a job I had before this job. And he has 2 jobs. Everybody else is purpose-built. So the Army we have Army Forces North, 5th Army, San Antonio. We have Air Forces North out of Tyndall Air Force Base, and they run the Air Operations Center for all of the United States and Canada. Now let's talk about our missions. And once I'm done talking about our missions, I'm going to open the floor to your questions. And inside there, it talks about the different threats that we face in the homeland. And I'll answer all your questions. I'll answer to the threats to the homeland through your questions. But the missions, again, for NORAD, if you open up your trifold on the left, it's aerospace. Again, if it's NORAD, it's aerospace focused. That is that North American Aerospace Defense Command. And it's aerospace warning and control. If it flies, we want to know about it. We work very closely with the FAA and the Canadian equivalent of the FAA. And then we control aircraft to deal with any of the threats, whether they're the traditional military threat or non-traditional threat in the air. That's aerospace warning and control. We also have another task that was added a few years back, maritime warning, which is really an intel function. If we, working with our partners, to sense anything, determine anything coming into the homeland from the maritime, we're going to warn all of the interagencies within the United States, which we were already doing, and within Canada. Northern Command, primary task, homeland defense. The aerospace piece is encompassed by the NORAD mission. The maritime, the naval, any maritime threat or a land threat, we handle that through Northern Command, and it's U.S. only. I'm going to go to the bottom, theater security cooperation, our relationships with Canada, Bahamas, and Mexico. We work with them. We average 1 to 2 missions a day with the Bahamas and 7 to 8 missions a day supporting SEDENA and SAMAR in Mexico. Very, very busy. And finally, defense support for civil authorities. This is a unique mission set for geographic combatant commanders. This encompasses helping any of the other lead federal agencies in the tasks that they have within the United States. So if Jay Johnson, if a governor of a state is confronted with what I call a WMD event, a weather of mass destruction event, that outstrips their capacity to deal with, they will go to Homeland Security, who will turn to FEMA, and they will ask for assistance. If the Department of Defense has the capability to assist, FEMA will come to the Secretary of Defense, ask for support, and Northern Command will provide that support. We will enable that particular support to assist FEMA to assist the governor of the state. If we are very active with Homeland Security, with one of their organizations called Custom and Border Patrol. And we have a Joint Task Force North, that is on what we call our middle border, the Mexican-U.S. border. And they provide the Department of Defense support to Custom and Border Patrol along that particular border. So if there's any agency that's out there, one of the things we're dealing with right now is helping Homeland Security with preparing for unaccompanied children that are dealing with the mass migration coming out of Central America. If it overstrips Homeland Security's capability, they asked us for assistance. And right now, we are preparing, I think it's 4 bases. Holloman is the Holloman Air Force Base in Arizona, right? Arizona? Holloman? New Mexico, thank you very much. As you fly over them, you lose track of where the borders are. And we provide the facilities, but Homeland Security provides all of the assistance, the care, the feeding, and everything. We're just providing the rooms to deal with these challenges for the children that would be there, unaccompanied families and children that would be there. So again, if there's another organization that needs Department of Defense support, U.S. Northern Command provides that support. And this is where the word, if you look again on the front, partners. This is what's so important. We partner with people, international organizations, and here in the homeland. You know, if there's one thing that my shipmate up here and I have learned in 14 years of war, combat's a team sport. Has nothing to do with football. Well, you're going to have an epic game here in a couple weeks here in San Francisco. But combat is the ultimate team sport. And partnering, understand who your partners are, and understanding what your needs are, what your partner's needs are, is absolutely critical. And that's where I'll take you, if you open up the flap to the lower right-hand corner, our key homeland partners. What's unique about Northern Command, NORAD and Northern Command, is we have over 60 liaison personnel that reside inside our headquarters. And they're from all of the agencies within our government, as well as our law enforcement partners. They're completely embedded into our operations and our intel fusion process. They are a part of the team. To be frank, we have our liaison officers in many of their organizations, either in their planning shops, or their intel organization as analysts. Because this is a team sport, whether it's a weather of mass destruction or a potential terrorist attack. And so just this morning, I was meeting with the FBI here in San Francisco. Just last Thursday, I was with the FBI in Minneapolis. I meet once a month. Next Friday, I'll meet again with Secretary Johnson of Homeland Security, partnering with them, understanding what their needs are, so that if they need the assistance of the Department of Defense, any of the agencies or services within the Department of Defense, we will not be late to need. We want to be there as quickly as possible, maybe with more capability than's needed, because we can always send it home. But we do not want to be late to support you, the American people. And with that, I look forward to your questions.
Admiral Gortney, thank you. So I've got a couple of question cards from the audience, and we'll continue.
I hate question cards. Ask the question.
Well,
all right. So let me take it.
Well, sir, I'm gonna sort these 2 cards.
Okay. All right. Do you consider China or Russia? Who asked that question? Stand up. It's only fair. There you go. Okay. His question is, do you consider China, RE, South China Sea, or Russia, Eastern Europe, or another source as the greatest threat to the U.S. security? Who is the greatest threat and why? Thank you for asking that question. You okay?
I'm good with it.
All right. I don't rank threats 1 to 10. It's not how we look at them. We rank threats from most likely to most dangerous. Does that make sense? And sometimes the most dangerous could be the least likely, depending on the nature of the threat. And so when I look at most likely to most dangerous, we'll start, I think you're asking what is the most dangerous threat. And it's any nation that can annihilate our nation from the face of the earth with nuclear weapons. So what are those countries? Obviously Russia. They can annihilate us. China has just put to sea. Now they have their seaborne ballistic leg of their triad. And anytime one of their SSBNs goes to sea, we assume, we don't know, but we assume it's on a combat patrol. And then again, there is North Korea, rogue nations that may have nuclear weapons. And one of my responsibilities in that regard is if the current leader of North Korea, I assess, because you pay me to assess most dangerous scenarios, has the ability to put a nuclear weapon on an ICBM and it can range the homeland, I have the capability to knock it down. I own the trigger of that. So when I look at the most dangerous I think is Russia, then China, although China has a no first use policy, and I think that's good. And then there's the unpredictable nature of North Korea. I'm a history major. My father bought my degree. I did not go to the Naval Academy. He's still pretty upset about it. But I look longingly for the predictable nature of the current leader's father in North Korea. I think the peninsula is more unstable today than since the armistice. As I look to the more likely, and the more likely is what's getting ready to confront the northeast of our country, a weather of mass destruction, a massive storm. So just before coming in here, we're preparing bases at the what we call intermediate staging bases, where if FEMA or anybody else needs to put capability for a location, we're preparing those bases to take that to deal with the storm. It's a weather of mass destruction event. And we look at that regionally because last time I checked, earthquakes and storms don't honor state borders. Just my observation. But then when we look at the non-traditional threat, I'm very concerned about today, the very sophisticated social media campaign that's coming out of Daesh. I will not give them credit and call them ISIL. They are the darkness. And they are motivating citizens of countries to do harm to fellow citizens. I'm not so concerned about those that are communicating back, that are active in the social media process, because if they are, we have sensors that might be able to pick them up. I'm very concerned about those that are just reading that social media and are radicalized to do something and are not transmitting, and their families do not see or are unwilling to come forward and say one of their youth has been radicalized and are going to do harm. This is what happened in Chattanooga. And so that's where we look at. And as we look at those threats, threat reports and threat streams, we measure those threats against 4 attributes, because it's not black and white. You're really trying to take a very subjective issue and apply an objective measure to it. And we measure them against specificity, imminency, plausibility, and probability. And what's hard is the where and the when. Because if we knew FBI, who's the Justice Department has responsibility for this, is going to be ready. And if they're going to come onto a DoD installation or try and do something against that, we'll be able to harden up. But it's lacking that specificity and imminency, the where and the when, causes us great concern. Because one of my other responsibilities as Northern Command is I set the force protection condition, the measures that are in place for all of the DoD facilities within the continental United States. Admiral Harris at PACOM has Hawaii, but he follows whatever we do. So, Ned, I hope that answers your question. Okay. Next question.
So, Admiral, I'm going to repeat each question because we're going to broadcast this, and that way we get a good sound piece since we don't have a microphone in the audience.
But that prevents me from answering the question I want to answer and not the question they asked.
This is true, sir. Those are the Marine rules here.
Okay, all right. Semper Fi. Yes, sir.
You mentioned infectious diseases as one of your areas of responsibility. Could you expand on that?
Yeah, the question is, infectious diseases are part of the responsibility of Northern Command. To expand on that.
So we synchronize the activity. So if there is I have a saying, don't kiss a chicken on the lips. Don't hug a camel, things like that. But if there is a mechanism, we partner with those responsible in the homeland and then make sure that all of the other geographic combatant commanders understand how to, and the services understand how to deal with potential infectious disease. Yes, ma'am.
Had the current command and control structure been in place on 9/11, would that attack that day have been prevented?
There's a very thick report called the 9/11 Commission. It's about this thick. And in it, it's very critical of NORAD because, of course, NORTHCOM was not there. because NORAD, and they're critical of NORAD because NORAD postulated the threat from airliners, but they were unable to convince anybody that it was a real threat. And so NORAD is criticized because they couldn't convince somebody that there was a potential for a threat. I don't think that's particularly fair. I've tried to make people drink water, and sometimes they don't want to drink water. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, you can do your best, but people have to buy into the threat. The other thing is more important. The other critical part of the 9/11 Commission report is before 9/11, if you were part of the intel organization or law enforcement organization, you were encouraged not to share information. You were encouraged not to. Since 9/11, no one wants to not share information. No one wants to have that golden BB of information that would be the final solution to the Rubik's Cube. Now, I think that is, quite frankly, a little unfair, too. I'm not sure if we had it all, we could have pieced it all together, right? And it goes to the other question, piecing it all together and convincing somebody that there's a threat there. But the important thing since 9/11 is how law enforcement and intel communities work together and share information to find out, is it credible, specific, plausible, imminent? Those are the important thing. I think the chain of command that you see in that upper right-hand quadrant is more important for two things today. One is the traditional threat to the homeland. You know, we're returning to great power competition. Secretary of Work, Deputy Secretary of Defense talks about it. And, you know, since the fall of the Cold War 25 years ago, the fall of the Berlin Wall, we pretty much were a unilateral superpower. And even though we've been fighting for 15 years of war, today there's the reemergence of Russia, and there's the rise of China. And so we have to remember there's great potential for great power conflict. It's the reality, okay? And we need to be able to deal with it. And the capabilities that Russia is developing and Russia's developing, there is a need for, I believe, a commander that is responsible for the defense of the homeland against the traditional threats against all domains. And that's U.S. Northern Command and everything but cyber. And Homeland Security is responsible for the cyber threat for the homeland. But for against the traditional threat, that I believe there's clearly a responsibility. The other thing about that is when there is a defense support for civil authorities. If another agency needs support, we work through our components who work with their parent services to provide that capability. We provide the command and control to attach the capability, the soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Coast Guardsman, to then deal whatever the task happens to be.
Sir, let's stay on NORAD for a minute and just have a follow-up question to that. So are we in better shape today to intercept this kind of a threat? One of the big discussions after 9/11 was we had F-16s and F-15s up in the air, some of them launched without any weapons on them. We have different procedures now. What do you do if there's, whether it's a commercial airliner that is taken over, which is very unlikely because the security situation there is pretty robust, but more likely a private type of an aircraft that's been identified as not responding, that's moving to a position that could be a target. What's the procedure that you go through, and what's the timeline? How quickly can we respond to that threat?
On the morning of 9/11, everybody that's involved with flying airplanes or controlling airplanes picked up the phone and have been on a conference call ever since. The phones have never been hung up. And we maintain fighters on alert throughout Canada and the United States to be able to deal with that potential threat. And we work very, very closely with the FAA and with the organizations that support general aviation, AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilot Association, on training general aviation aviators, which I am, if Sherry would let me buy another airplane, one of those owners, train them where they can fly and where they can't fly. And we have what we call, that's Operation Noble Eagle, and we have one of those conference calls at least once or twice a day for someone that is flying where they shouldn't be. I'm not so worried about the airliner threat. that much today. I mean, we have a pretty good handle, and there's a whole back-end process that supports how people, who's on airplanes and how they don't, and how they're screened, all responsibility of Homeland Security through TSA. But if there is one, it's where there's seams, you can find your seam and you find your enemy, right? That's what you and I were brought up to train, to learn. And it's could be that general aviation or the light commercial aircraft that doesn't have the security that the other side of the airfield has. So if that's an area, and that's where we're working, trying to close those particular seams.
So a two-part question. First, what is the most likely type of threat from China? And the second piece is on the topic of drones, commercially available drones, falling into the hands of extremists and being used in a manner that would constitute terrorism on the homeland.
Okay, two-part answer to the first, long answer to the third. First one from China, cyber, they're stealing us blind. They're stealing our intellectual property. I do not believe their premier that said they're going to stop doing it. I don't believe that for a second. And they're in our networks. And if they're in our networks, and we haven't seen any physical damage from that, but they can leave things back there that if they want to, they can do something about it. So they cannot keep their economy going without stealing our intellectual property, and they're stealing us blind. They're stealing you blind. Fact. Next with China is the South China Sea. Not in my wheelhouse, not my responsibility as the NORAD Northern Commander. This is Bill Gortney answering, and my best friend is Harry Harris, who's the PACOM Commander. Not following the international rules of norm and scaring their neighbors, and the potential for conflict in the South China Sea is very, very high, as they are taking artificial reefs and building island, building airstrips, defending those airstrips. Claiming territory by international standards is not theirs, and they're not following the rules on that. And so the potential for conflict and miscalculation, I think in the future over the next 5 to 10 years, very, very high with China. Watching it very, very closely. The drones. I think Amazon sells 15,000 quadricopters a month. I think that's the number. From the threat perspective to the homeland, I'm not so worried. As an aviator, I'm terrified that one day one of these quadricopters is going to get sucked down the left side of an engine of a 767. And so just on Friday, this next Friday, I'll be with Homeland Security with Secretary Johnson and the team that's tackling on how we're going to deal with these, with all of the agencies that are going to be there. And when you look at the drone problem, there's 3 classes of people that you need to worry about. The first are the 99.999999% of Americans that are law-abiding citizens that just don't know where they should fly them and where they shouldn't. And so working with industry, that when they open up their box, and I just bought one for my 6-year-old grandson. It's eminently cool. It's only about this big. Where can you fly it? Where can't you fly it? You register it for free. You just get on the FAA website. It takes about 2 minutes to register it. And then you can download an app, one from the Apple Store, and they're working on the Android app, that before you fly, where can you fly it, where can't you fly it? And it knows where you are, so it can say, yeah, you're good to fly here, or no, don't fly it here. So it's an education issue. The next piece, the next group, are those that know they shouldn't be flying it somewhere and are flying it anyway. That's criminal activity. So if you're within 10 miles of Reagan, you're not supposed to fly a drone there, quadricopter there. A couple of months ago, wasn't very expensive fine. You probably need a loan today to pay off that fine. So punish those that are choosing to not do something. The last one is someone who's going to try and use the drone for nefarious activity. And in that regard, given the nature and the size of the drone, how much damage can that drone possibly do? I mean, you can load a Prius up with explosives, find out how to build that explosive on the internet today, and drive it anywhere you want to and do far more damage than you can with this little drone. So in that last category, I'm not too worried. If it's big enough to do that, as the NORAD commander, depending on where you are in the country, I probably have the sensors to detect you. and then pass that information off to somebody that will be able to finish it if I can't finish it. So that's a very, very low likely. So I'm more concerned about that other side, education, and then punishing those that are choosing to not follow the rules.
Admiral, part of your area of responsibility includes the Arctic. And so there's a couple of questions related to that. First of all, the Russians have moved significant, military forces in preparation for economic initiatives and opening that area up for moving goods and trade. How does that impact us, and what is climate change doing in a broader sense in terms of your command?
Yeah. Well, I have two tasks when it comes to the Arctic. One is the defense of the homelands, Canada and the United States, because the Arctic is a path of attack from our adversaries, whether from space or from air, because the world's round, and that's the easiest way to get to us. And quite frankly, we have F-22s up in Alaska, home based in Alaska, and we can get them anywhere in the world faster than we can to the F-22s based at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. So it is all about the geography, the strategic importance of Alaska. Location, location, location. Any realtors in here? Location, location, location. And it's an avenue of attack. And so that's my number one concern. I do have an additional assigned task that I am the advocate for the Arctic for the Department of Defense. Now, you're schooled at military war colleges. What is the doctrinal term? What does advocate mean?
Yeah, you don't really own it. You're just representing.
You got it wrong. Thank God you're a Marine. And because there's not a doctrinal term.
That was a trick question.
It was a trick
From the
question.
Navy, they always do that.
Yeah. You don't open up the book and go, oh, this is what it means. Because we like to know what words mean. Words matter. And so the good news about that is we can answer the question as being the advocate any way we want to. The bad news is people that don't agree with us can try and say, no, you're not answering the question the right way. Being an advocate, you assume additional responsibilities. But we're trying to answer that capability that within all of the Department of Defense, the services, the geographic combatant commanders, the functional combatant commanders, the various agencies that we have, what are the capabilities that we need to operate in the Arctic? Because the Arctic is changing. And it's a very emotional issue. And I try and answer, I found in my years of service that answering questions fact-based gets you a better answer than emotionally based. And when it comes to the Arctic, the spectrum of conflict is, on one end, that's where you're going to go for your summer vacation instead of the Bahamas. And I just don't want to see you in a Speedo. And the right-hand side is that nothing's changed. And the truth is always in the middle somewhere. And to be honest, the Arctic is more dangerous today because the Arctic is changing. But in order to operate in the Arctic, there's three things we have to solve. We have to be able to communicate up there. We have to be able to navigate up there. And we have to be able to sustain ourselves up there. Now, the first two is just pure science. We'll figure it out. I mean, we landed a man on the moon or we faked it. Either one was an incredible technological feat. We're the greatest nation in the world. And we'll figure that out. Navy's got 4 satellites up there. We had a Coast Guard cutter go all the way up to the North Pole, and we were able to communicate with them most of the way. We forgot to tell Santa that Coast Guard cutter was coming, so he was pretty upset. But the navigation, we can clearly figure out. But the sustainment piece is really, really hard. It is a harsh place. It is more dangerous today than it's ever been because of the changing nature of it. And I've been north of the Arctic Circle on 4 occasions. I took Sherry, my lovely wife, my high school sweetheart, to the center, north central part of Alaska for Valentine's Day to meet with the families up there on a base that we have up there. I'm a romantic fool. It didn't help. And it is a harsh place. We have NORAD fighter bases that are north of the Arctic Circle. We have to take everything with us up there, fuel, food, everything. because the population can't support other than themselves, because there's such a short duration that they can ship in what they need to survive up there. So the sustainment piece is the long pole, will be the long pole in the tent. And then what we're really trying to answer as we figure out the communication, navigation, and sustainment, and this is where both ends of the spectrum come to a stalemate. Once we figure that out, in order to do what? In order to do what? And that's a real tough question. But from myself as the NORAD NORTHCOM perspective, in order to do what is you want me to defend you from that as an avenue attack. And we look at it in that respect. It is how are we going to deal with it? I often get the question about, because Russia is putting a lot of resources, military resources, recapitalizing their Arctic bases. And there's two reasons. One, they have the longest, the second longest coastline in the Arctic. The longest is Canada. But they also, to get their resources out, they need to keep their sea lines of communication open. And so they're investing in their military capability up there. And as a military officer, since I have no interest up there other than defensive in nature, if they want to invest their defense dollars up there, let them. They're not investing it someplace else. Next question.
Sir, just to clarify, I'm not going on vacation to the Arctic anytime soon.
Okay.
But you are in San Francisco, and you know, it's a standard issue piece of gear, the Speedo here. So just so you realize, if you spot anybody in the Tenderloin or in the Haight-Ashbury district,
Okay.
you know.
Well, thanks for the warning.
Sir, I'll grab another question in a minute. On the subject, I have a couple of question cards. On the subject of defense support to civilian authorities, two very good questions. One is there still a war on drugs, or is that something that is gone? And really in light of Mexico, heroin, cocaine still moving across the border at pretty rapid rates, maritime and by land. And then the issue of guns and firearms, which are very strictly regulated in Mexico, going south of the border. We have two supply and demand problems, and it's not a military problem, but it is in your area of interest as you partner with all these agencies.
I do partner with them, and we partner north of the border to tackle it, and we partner with Sudan and Samar to assist them as they're working it south of the border and capabilities that they need. There's a war on drugs. I think we're losing it. And, you know, this is a national problem. And we can't tackle it, if you want to tackle it north of the border or south of the border, you have to tackle it on both, on all aspects of the border, and quite frankly, on our flanks and from the north. And if we don't get our demand signal under control inside of our country, we're going to continue to lose the war on drugs, right? The current is heroin. And we have heroin moving in because it's cheaper than cocaine in massive quantities into the country. And it's killing the youth. It's killing the youth of our nation. And we as citizens should be very, very concerned about that. Today, coming out of Mexico, it is heroin and methamphetamines that are coming through the border, and predominantly heroin and methamphetamines coming through south around San Diego. Just about, when was it, guys? About 3 weeks ago, we were crawling through one of the tunnels between Mexico and San Diego. It's about this high. I could stand up in it. It was a joke. As we go there, the heroin is being produced in Mexico. The methamphetamines is being, I guess, mixed in Mexico, but the precursors are all coming from China. Massive factories in China. And so we got to tackle both those particular problems. I think the legalization of marijuana in our country is causing me problems. It comes up in every one of my discussions with the leaders of General Cienfuegos and Admiral Sobran and Sudan and Samar, who view the legalization problem the way I do, as a father and a grandfather, as an issue. We actually are exporting marijuana to Mexico because our THC content is higher than what they can grow down there. Only in America would we do something like this as we go forward. They're moving product. The cartels are moving product, and they're moving the kind of product that people want to buy and they're moving it any way they can in to find the seams. And so we as a nation need to work on both sides of this issue. And we really need to focus on the demand side in our nation.
Yeah, the question is, how is Mexico helping in the fight against drug trafficking?
Yeah. Well, my responsibility as the Northern Command commander is to work the military-to-military relationship in the capacity building of their Army and their Navy. And so that's what we do. There are other agencies in our government that work the other agency-to-agency coordination, but my responsibility is to work Sedena and Samar. I've been working with Mexico, Sedena and Samar, predominantly Samar, their Navy, for a long time, since about 2004, 2005, and it's been a game changer over the last 4 years. As they've been asked, both Sedena and Samar have been asked by their government, told by their government, that they're going to work on the internal security and challenges that are being confronted. It's a very tough mission for professional military officers to do, to work on this particular mission set. But they're good soldiers and sailors, and they salute and they're executing, and we are working with them, and they are taking bad people off the streets. Okay, they're doing very, very good. The capability that we've taught them between our Army and our Marine Corps and our special operators and our intel fusion process, they've outstripped the capability that we've gotten them. I consider both General Cienfuegos and Admiral Soberon friends. Sherry and I consider, we've been to their house, they've been to our house. They are very, very motivated. They work together, they're joint, which is really, really unusual, new as they go forward. But they have an immense challenge. And from Admiral Soberon's words, the number one problem that they have is corruption. And if they don't get their corruption problem under control, they're in for a really long slog, which is already a 25 to 30-year problem. Somehow they have to find and convince to pay their civil servants enough money to make the right decision. Don't have to make them rich, but you have to pay them enough to make the right decision and organize them correctly in order to tackle that.
So the question is the scope and scale of Northern Command. How do you prioritize your day? What are your strategic and operational level concerns? And how do you oversee such a vast organization, really two, between NORAD and NORTHCOM?
Actually, the question he asked was much easier to answer than the one you translated. If you've ever worked with me, I'm an organization and process guy. Activity without organization and process produces no results. So that's just me. And I'm also known as a problem solver. So cut to the root of a problem, find a solution, develop a plan, follow through to fruition. And one of the other things I do is, of all the assigned tasks we have, I break things down into categories. We call them lines of operation. Homeland defense is one of those lines of operation. Theater security cooperation, support to civil authorities, the Arctic. Who are our partners, international and within our government? Understanding your relationships that you need to do things. And then we map our activity back to those lines of operation, because if you're doing activity that doesn't map back to one of those operations, you either have a line of operation you didn't know about, or you're doing work you shouldn't be doing. And I don't want to do work that's someone else's responsibility. I got enough on my plate. And then within that, you have to prioritize. And so the number one task for us is the defense of the homeland through the traditional and the non-traditional threat. And the traditional threat I'm in charge of, and I know what I need to do. And in the non-traditional threat, I'm supporting Homeland Security Justice in order to do that, and where I have authorities to do that. And that's what we do. And then you delegate a lot. I am not a micromanager. I believe in delegation, holding people accountable for the tasks that I give them. And they tell me what they need, what authorities and resources they need, and it's my job to go get it for them. And then they tell me when it's mission complete. I find that's a good way to do business. So that's how we do it. I often get asked, what keeps me up at night? It's one of my favorite answers. A 12-year-old blind and diabetic miniature schnauzer and a 60-year-old bladder. And because I sleep pretty well at night. And the reason I sleep well at night is because in the defense of the homeland, it's an away game. You do not want to defend the homeland from the catcher's mitt perspective. You need people that take the fight and fight the fight forward, and that build the conditions that keep stability afar. And that's the importance of the forward deployed geographic combatant commanders, who are not there. Their primary task is to prevent conflict from ever occurring, create the conditions and the stability, and work on those areas that prevent conflict, because it's always cheaper to win a war by not fighting it than try and fight it. In the homeland, I only mustered 2,700 soldiers, sailor, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen a day, predominantly guardsmen who do the Operation Noble Eagle mission and the ballistic missile defense mission. And they do phenomenal work. They're well trained, they have the great capability, and they execute really, really well. And if it's something bad, I know I'm going to get the capability that's out there. And then I'm very confident of my mission partners that I support, the other interagency partners. And we're a great nation. We are a great nation. Do we have challenges? Yeah. But there's too many people think that, we wear the cloth of the nation because we're wearing this uniform. Last time I checked, no one got drafted into Homeland Security. No one got drafted to be a policeman or a fireman or first responder. They too are wearing the cloth of our nation. They're supporting the very society that we're supporting. We do it overseas. I'm doing it here in the homeland, but we predominantly do it overseas. So I sleep well at night. Next question.
In terms of San Francisco is a great city, and it is a military town, even though all the military bases that used to be here, and there's about a dozen of them that were within a 50-mile radius. Most of those went away with the base realignment piece of the mid-'90s. But it really still treats its military well, and this town always has. When Senator Dianne Feinstein was the mayor, she started Fleet Week here, and San Francisco's Fleet Week is really, in my opinion, the best in the nation. And it brings the Blue Angels, it brings the sailors of Canada as well as the United States, and we spend a week celebrating our fleet and our maritime history. At the same time, we do something very special here, and it happens here in the Marines Memorial Club, and that's we rehearse the disaster response scenarios for a city like this after an earthquake, after a tsunami, after any kind of natural disaster. And we bring the senior leaders of FEMA, of the state, of the city, of the military entities in California. They all come here, and what you talked about, it's an interagency meeting. People meet each other face to face, and we actually rehearse these things, and we study what happened in Nepal last year in the earthquake, what happened in the Philippines the year before that with the tsunami. San Francisco Fleet Week is a wonderful thing that I know NORTHCOM supports.
Absolutely.
And so on NPR and in front of the world, I'm going to ask you for your support again in the coming years, and we'd love to export that to other cities so that we can get that same kind of synergy between interagency.
Absolutely. We've learned that in combat, you don't rise to your expectations. You fall to the level of your training. And so we work very, very closely with the earthquake scenario here. We do two major exercises in Northern Command. One of them is a weather of mass destruction event. We did it for Los Angeles, with Los Angeles and Arizona in the fall this year, on how we're going to provide the DoD support when it exceeds the capability that the governor and his emergency manager can do. I've never seen soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard more motivated than when they're helping fellow American citizens in a time of need. They're really motivated. And they're going to show up, and they're going to help. Sandy, we had reservists from all the services just put on their uniform and just went to work. And just because that's what they want to do. And so we look forward. We do not want to be in charge. NORTHCOM, military does not want to be in charge of this. There are scenarios where NORTHCOM could be in charge. I don't want that to ever happen because that's a very bad day for America. But we love being good supporting commanders, and we're going to show up, and we're going to be late to need.
Sir, as an infantryman, I have to ask you one more question, and it's about an airplane. And
All right, I've connected those two thoughts.
Would you answer that?
Sure.
So, the F-35 aircraft is the most modern, amazing piece of technology that we've produced in a long time. But I'm looking at the budget around one piece of military hardware, and that's the F-35.
Yeah.
The Air Force version, the Alpha, costs $148 million a copy. The Marine F-35B comes in at $251 million a copy because it needs to be a vertical takeoff, short takeoff landing type of aircraft. The Navy version that needs to be able to withstand landing on a carrier deck, $337 million. The average cost of a Joint Strike Fighter is $178 million. And then it comes with a helmet that's worth $400,000 that you wear this helmet. In an age where our defense budget is shrinking, and I know you're kind of partial to the muscle car called the F-18, because that was your airplane. We could buy 4 F-18s for the cost of one Joint Strike Fighter. I wouldn't ask you to question the decision-making necessarily of our procurement people, but is it really, are we getting the bang for the buck? Is this worth the cost? And what are we giving up in the future years as the defense budget is scheduled to shrink?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm a pilot, and I love airplanes. They're cool. I'm second generation naval aviator. The question is, what is the right mix at the end of the day? Because we can't afford all that we want, right? And, you know, we're not teenagers. Didn't get a chuckle. The question, though, is what is the right mix of high and low? So I won't speak to the Air Force or the Navy or the Marine Corps' requirement. I think I'm, as the senior naval aviator on active duty, Navy and Marine aviator on active duty, I think I can comment from the Navy. And the Navy has always been a mix of high capability and low capability because we've never been able to afford 100% high. And that's with ships and airplanes. And so on an aircraft carrier, having the right mix of capability is what is the most important thing to me, and within the fleet. We are a system of systems. And if you overbuy in one system and underbuy in a lesser system, then the system of systems may fail in combat. So I look at it more from a system of systems approach. What are the systems I need? And so that if I overbuy or underbuy, it's an informed choice and it's not an emotional choice, if that makes sense. So we want in the Navy the F-35, but we have 44 fighters that we put in on an aircraft carrier in our air wings. Only 10 of them are going to be F-35s. The rest are going to be Super Hornets. And so we need to also make those Super Hornets as capable as we possibly can so the system of systems can fight. And I can't do that at the expense of airborne early warning and jamming and helicopters, if that makes sense. So I think it's important that we buy the correct mix of system of systems and that we have the options to do that. I will also tell you, this is no surprise to anybody, that I'm a fan of competition in the industrial base. And as our industrial base has shrunk, we are losing our technological advantage of competition. And so it's no secret that I do not want a single company building the fighters for the United States of America, because it will stifle the intellectual capital and our ability to produce the best capability at the best cost. You know, when we look at industry and we look at the military, industry must make a profit for their shareholders. We in the military want to get the best capability and capacity at the best cost for the American taxpayers. And I firmly believe that the only way that we come to the middle ground solution, I mean, what makes a great marriage? But to get to the middle ground solution that forces the middle ground, that gets the profit for the shareholders and the best value for the American taxpayer, competition brings people to the center. And so I like having competition in order to breed the intellectual best. You know, why are we the greatest military and the greatest nation in the world? First off, why are we the greatest nation in the world? It's not our military. It's you and business. It's our economy and it's our businesses. That is the strength of America. We back that up in the military. We take the very best of the youth of America. 23% of high school graduates in America today are only eligible to get into the military. And we're in competition with you if you're in industry to do that. But we take the very best of the youth of America. They are bright kids. We combine them with the very best of American technology. We then give them the best leadership. And then here's the real secret sauce. We top it off with the very best training. And that's why no one will defeat us on a battlefield. And so now we're not cheap. We're the all-volunteer force. And going on 15 years of war, our nation's been at war. Less than 1% of America has raised their right hand and sworn to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Less than 1% of America. So if there's 1% that's out there, anybody out there? Is that 1% in this audience? Any part of this 1%? Stand up. Raise up. Stand up. Give this gentleman a big round of applause for doing that. And you know what I think is fascinating in that 15 years of war? That 1%, we've never had better support from the American people. It's been unbelievable. Many Americans may question why we're in the wars, but they've never questioned the soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Coast Guardsman that's been in that fight. And so I want to thank you for that. But we need your support now more than ever as we move forward. We can't be fatigued. And I tell all of my shipmates and wingmen and battle buddy that are in uniform, we cannot take it for granted the support of the American people, which is why we're here talking to you tonight. Because we need your support. Our service members in the future need your support just as much. And our wounded need your support. And the families of the fallen need your support. Because it's been that 1%, less than 1%, who's been bearing the burden. So thank you for that support.
Sir, we've reached our time. We are very appreciative, and on behalf of General Myatt, I would like to invite you to Fleet Week or elements of your staff to come and see how we do things. Former Secretary of State George Shultz usually leads the Senior Leader Seminar, and it's really a wonderful thing. And so if your schedule is open in October, we'd love to have you here.
If I can be here, I'll be here, but I know my staff's here.
Yes, sir. Your staff has always supported us, and we appreciate that going forward. And thank you for coming. Admiral Gortney will be around for a short while afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you very much.